and we are looking forward for the session. And hopefully my students will be able to make most of it. And as all the students have been informed, please keep yourself mute and keep your videos on. At the end of the session, we have already requested to Miss Heena. She will be addressing, she will be taking your queries. So none of your query will be unanswered, will go unanswered once the session is finished. So once again, a very warm welcome to Miss Heena. And on behalf of the THS, the Hotel School, I welcome you and I thank you we appreciate you for giving us time for this session. Now it's over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Girish. Just a couple of things before we start. Am I allowed to share my screen?
Yes, Heena, you can.
Okay. So it says it's disabled. Can you enable it if it's possible?
Yeah, you can check it now, ma'am.
Okay, 1 second. Yes, perfect. Can you all see my screen? Can you all see it? Yeah, it's visible? All right. Okay, so as Girish said, we're going to keep everyone on mute. I will be the one talking for a while, so you will have to bear with me. But probably after half an hour or so, I think we should be done with the session, and then I'll open it for questions. You can put it in the chat if you like, or you can ask me in person. So hi, my name is Heena. As Girish introduced, I've already done one session with your college, and I work with Sula Vineyards. I take care of tastings, training, and marketing for Sula. So I take care of Delhi, UP, a bit of Punjab, Ladakh, so mostly around North India. And I know we're all stuck at home, and it's really demotivating because 1 month was also okay, but now 4 months, I think we really need to start getting back to our routine and getting back to our work. So I thought this might be interesting to just get in touch with you, kind of brush up on our wine knowledge. I'm not going to take it too advanced. We're just going to keep it basic. If you already know about it, let's just brush up those points, and perhaps you learn something new you're interested in. As I said, please keep yourself on mute through this session. I will be the only one talking. So I work with Sula, and Sula is one of the oldest wine companies in India. So wine history in India is quite tricky, and I want to tell you about it today. If you look at the world history of wine, in India, it's been fairly recent that most people have wine. But if you see across the world, wine's been around for a really long time. And while this lockdown was going on, so I was trying to study the history of wine, and I came across a really funny incident. So it's a story. I don't know if it's true, but I think it's, just if you have to tell somebody about wine and get them interested in it, it might be nice. So there was, really, really old, when nobody knew about alcohol, there was a monkey, and he was sitting by a tree, and there were grapevines around. And the villagers saw him every day. He was just, going about his business. And then one day they saw this monkey. He was super energized. He was just jumping around everywhere. And they thought, has he fallen sick? What's wrong with him? So they tried to analyze it, and they saw that he'd eaten some grapes that had fallen on the ground. And they were like, okay, but grapes shouldn't induce that behavior. So back in the day, most of these studies were done by monks, people who we actually associate with prayers now. Most of the research was also done by the monks. The monks studied it, they picked up the grape, and they actually found alcohol within the grape. So what had happened was the grape skin hadn't burst, and there were sugars in it, and it had fallen off, and it had started to ferment within the skin and produce alcohol. Okay, so the monkey had had the alcoholic grapes and probably started to behave like a drunk person. I don't know if this story is true, but it surely is interesting if you want to tell somebody about wine. This is an actual process. It's called carbonic maceration, where fermentation starts to happen within the skin of the grape. So it might have actually happened. We never know. But coming to real time history, it started around 6000 BC somewhere in a place called Azerbaijan. So if you see the area around Georgia, and I've marked it on the map here, it's really, really far from France, contrary to the popular belief when we think most of the winemaking started in France. It actually started near Georgia. They found some amphoras. You know, amphora is a vessel which looks like a modern day earthen pot. Uh, so the red colored pots that you see in which we store water, the pitchers. So they used to put grapes in them and bury them in the ground and then forget about them for, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, whatever. And the grapes would ferment and then, they'd turn into wine. Uh, so that's the evidence that they found. They found that residue around 6000 BC. So it's really, really old since people have been making wines. So from there, it traveled all the way to France. And that's where I think winemaking revolutionized and, all the research started happening. There were so many grape varietals that were grafted onto each other. And hence, we have so many grapes in today's time. That is why people attribute France to kind of develop what is modern winemaking, but it actually started somewhere else. That's a little bit about the history of wine across the world. Did it ever happen in India? So a lot of people ask me, why is wine drinking not a part of our culture? Why is it so slow? Why has it not grown? Not just wine drinking, even drinking is not really a part of our culture. This is not something uh, most of us do with our parents, probably some of us, but most of us don't see it as a family thing. So that is the thing about wines. It never became a part of our culture. In Europe and overseas, it became a part of their religion, where the Catholics, they consider that this is the blood of Jesus. So once it became a part of their religion, I think it started getting included in so many of their ceremonies, and so many people would drink it, and the kings would drink it. So I think the people just followed. In India, that never happened. It never became a part of our religion. And we've had so many invasions in India by different cultures that it never really blew. So in 1300, 13th century, we do have evidence of winemaking in India. There were plants around Dalhousie, Dehradun, that belt, where people had planted grapes, but it never flourished in India. And modern Indian winemaking has nothing to do with those grapes. So there is Anabe Shahi and Bhokri. All of these are indigenous Indian grapes, but they're not used in modern Indian winemaking. We import the plants. We have all the imported varieties. We have the Cabernet Sauvignons and the Shiraz and the Pinot Noir. We don't have any local Indian varieties that we use for making wine. So I hope you learned something a little bit from this about the history of wine. Now, what is wine? We know that it's existed, for a long time, but what is it? So when we say wine, I will not go into the very technical definition of it. Whenever I ask students, they come up with, the bookish definition that it is an alcoholic beverage. It's made from freshly picked grapes. But let's remember wine. Let's not learn and mug it up. Let's remember it. So obviously it's an alcohol, okay? So first thing, wine is an alcoholic beverage. So what is it made from? It is made from grapes. Wine is an alcoholic beverage that is made from grapes. Can I make it from anything else? Yes, absolutely. I can make it from something else as well. I can make it from apples. I can make it from pears. But will I still be able to call it wine? No. I will be able to call it apple wine or pear wine. When it comes from any other source other than grapes, we have to write the name of the source with the word wine. When we say just wine, it is made from 100% grapes. Okay. So now you remember it is an alcoholic beverage made from grapes. Why do they say freshly gathered grapes? Because most grapes are picked early in the morning when there's no sunlight, the sugars haven't kind of started to develop, and the acidity is at its peak. So they pick up the grapes fresh and they just take it to the winery so that they can be crushed as fresh as possible. So that's where the word fresh comes from. What are the other things that we need to remember? Now, if you just get the basics of it, I think you can kind of, start to build on those basics and learn a lot more. Now, I said it is made from fermentation. If you see whiskey or if you see gin or if you see vodka or any other spirit, right, they go a step ahead, and after that fermentation they do distillation. Okay, so you have x amount of alcohol and then you distill it further and increase that alcohol level and concentrate it. Whereas in wine, the thing stops at fermentation and then we just filter and bottle it. I will take you through the process, but it is basically an undistilled beverage, and that is what we need to remember forever. Why do we need to remember it? Is because when you don't distill it, there is a lot of natural components that stay back in the wine. They don't get, filtered out in distillation. So all those natural components, of course, because they are natural, they are alive, they are going to interact with each other, they are going to react with each other, and they are going to affect the flavor and the taste and the aroma of wine. All of those things are going to be affected even after it has been bottled, you have purchased it from the market, and you have put it in your cellar. So even when it is sitting in your cellar, it is changing the flavor, the aroma, the taste. Okay, that's when the age of the wine comes in. That's when the vintage will come in. So I will tell you how to correlate everything and how to make sure that you are having the freshest wine possible. Yeah. Before we do that, let's go through the winemaking process. It's very, very simple. It's not very complicated. Let's just remember how the natural sequence would be, how the logical sequence would be. Okay. So in India, the grapes they start to ripen around December end. Okay. After the monsoons, we prune the wine. So pruning is cutting the plant. So after that, once the new leaves come up, the flowers set in. After the flowers set in, the fruit sets in. Once the fruit sets in, the viticulture team, the team that works at the farm, they start taking samples of the grapes. Now, like any other fruit, this is the season of mangoes. So let me give you an example of mangoes. If your mango is too sour, it is unripe, you're not going to enjoy it, right? You use it to make chutney or whatever. You don't just have it like that. If your mango is too sweet, you miss that balance of acidity. Okay? So you miss that slight bit of sourness if it's just sugar. Also remember the sequence of ripening. So mangoes start coming in just when the summer starts, and that's when the temperatures are low. When the temperatures are low, the mangoes that you get are more sour, less sweet. Okay. So when you say sour, that means they are acidic. So acidity has a direct relationship with the temperature. If it's cool temperature, the grapes are going to be more sour. The mangoes are going to be more sour. If it's hot temperature, with the heat, the mangoes ripen, they become sweeter. Similarly, with the heat, the grapes will ripen, they will become sweeter. The acidity will go down. While sampling the grapes, the viticulture team wants to find that perfect juncture when they have the right amount of sourness and the right amount of sweetness. Okay. Once they think they have that, they set a date for harvest, the harvest starts. Harvesting is just the picking of the grapes. In India, most of the harvest happens manually because we have access to economical labor. So harvest starts after we've harvested the grapes, depending on whether they are red or black grapes or they are white grapes. Okay, so you can call them red or black; it's the same thing, or you can call them green, yellow, white. It's the same thing. So depending on the kind of grape that we have, we are either going to crush it or press it. Um, Crushing is, when you crush it and you use the skin, the seeds, the pulp, the juice, everything. And pressing is when you're pressing the grape slightly and extracting the juice. So red wine, white wine, depending on what it is, you will either crush them or press them and add yeast to it. So once the yeast is added, the fermentation starts. After the fermentation is complete, the yeast has eaten up all the sugar and converted it into alcohol. And we say, okay, my wine is ready now. I will choose whether I want to blend it or not. The most common blend that you will see once you go out of work is a Cabernet Shiraz or a Shiraz Cabernet. Okay, there are two grapes, Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. Now, suppose I make a wine called Sula Shiraz Cabernet, and this year my Cabernet is less ripe, or it's not acidic enough or whatever, and my Shiraz is more acidic. So to balance my wine this year, I would say I want to put 80% of Shiraz and 20% of Cabernet Sauvignon. The next year maybe the conditions are different, and I will say this year I will do 75-25. Okay, so that is called blending. Most of this happens in the lab. So a lot of winemaking happens in the lab where there's a lot of mixing, trial, error, testing. After that, a panel sits down and tastes these wines and they pick the perfect blend for that year. So that is called blending. Uh, After that, the wine goes for stabilization. So stabilization is basically cooling down the wine to remove the crystals and tartrates and everything. After stabilization, I can choose to age my wine. Now, aging is a concept which is widely discussed in whiskeys, in wines, and now even in beers. I think barrel aged, or oak aged is something that people pride themselves on. Is every wine aged? No. Does every wine need to be aged? No. Can white wines be aged? Yes. So these are the questions that often come up to me. Are only red wines aged? No. So basically, it depends on the winemaker in the sense that what kind of flavor they want to impart to the wine. Okay. Wine aging can happen in a cemented vat. It can happen in a stainless steel tank. It can happen in an oak barrel. It can happen even in a bottle. Okay, so the vessel is completely the choice of the winemaker. Why do people use oak barrels? Is because oak oak is a type of wood. It imparts certain kinds of flavors to the wine. Also, it helps the tannins to kind of round off in a wine, and I will explain that in a minute. So basically, it's a wooden barrel. It's made from the oak tree. It can come from France. It can come from America. It can come from Hungary. So there's primarily three kinds of oaks: Hungarian, French, and American. It they differ in terms of their grades, the grain of the wood. Some of them are more expensive, some of them are slightly more economical, some of them impart really strong flavors to the wine, and some of them are more subtle. So depending on what kind of flavor they want, they will use that kind of oak. Oak barrels can be new, they can be old. Okay? So if it's a new barrel, think of it as a fresh tea bag. If it's a new barrel and you put wine in it, it's going to give a lot of its flavor because it's just new wood. But maybe by the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth time you use it, think of it as a used tea bag. Okay, so the flavors are going to get less and less. So why would somebody use that barrel? Because it's still wood, it still has pores, and it still gives the wine a chance to interact with oxygen and develop. Okay? Too much oxygen is bad for wine, but a little bit of oxygen is also required for wine. So that's about aging in oak or in other vessels. After that, the wine goes for filtration, like I said, fermented and then filtered. So basically, we remove all the unnecessary particles, and then it goes for labeling, bottling, and dispatch. Then it comes to you for consumption. Okay? So that is the basic of the winemaking process. Now, based on how the wine is made, there are different kinds of wines that can be produced. Now, remember the sequence and remember, how you can correlate everything. Like I said, it happens, wine is made by a process called fermentation. Okay. What is fermentation? Fermentation is the process of conversion of sugars into alcohol and byproducts. Now, what is the most important byproduct that we're going to use is carbon dioxide. Okay. Based on whether I use the carbon dioxide or I let it go, I can produce different styles of wine, types of wine. So if I don't use the carbon dioxide and I just bottle the alcohol, then I get something called a still wine. Most of these bottles that look like this are for a still wine. Still simply meaning still, there's no movement inside it. If I use the carbon dioxide from that fermentation and I put it in my bottle, I get something called a sparkling wine. Now, sparkling wine bottles, you can identify them from a distance. They look slightly bigger and more curvier from here. Sparkle in those wines is nothing but carbon dioxide bubbles. Okay, so that is called sparkling wine. Now, both still wine and sparkling wine can be red, can be white, can be rosé. I already told you that we can either crush the grapes or press the grapes and make a red wine or a white wine out of it. There is also another color of wine called rosé, which is a light pink color. People often call it blush wines, and it's a very, very light pink color. Now, let's remember that the color is in the skin of the grape. The pulp and the juice of the grape is white. If I leave the skin on the juice for 10 days, I'm going to get a lot of color. That color is going to bleed into the juice and I'm going to get a dark color. So I can make a red wine out of it. But if I only leave the skin on the juice for a few hours, say 4 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours, I'm going to get a very light extraction of that color, and that's going to be your rosé wine. So rosé wine is essentially made in the same way as white wines, except that uh, it has skin contact of the red skins. So you will definitely need red grapes to make rosé wines as well. You can blend it with white grapes as well, or you can just separate the juice and just put the skins on for a while and then go on to make a rosé wine. So still wine, red, white, rosé, sparkling wine, red, white, rosé. Now, most of these still and sparkling wines, the alcohol percentage will probably end at 15.5%. That's probably the maximum you're going to get. What if I want a more alcoholic wine, right? Then what do? I have no sugar left. All of that has been converted into alcohol. So how do I get a more alcoholic wine? So in that case, I can choose to fortify my wine with external alcohol. The only condition being that alcohol has to come from grapes. So which is why a lot of people pick brandy as their choice to fortify, or it can be any other alcohol. It has to come from grapes. And I have my wine, I add that alcohol to it, and that increases the alcohol level of my wine. So that is called a fortified wine. Sometimes this alcohol is added to stop the fermentation when I want a sweeter wine. So, for example, my alcohol percentage has only reached 7-8%, and there is sugar left in my wine. All of that is not get converted to alcohol. And I say I want a sweet wine. So I add more alcohol to it. The yeast dies because it cannot survive in a very alcoholic environment, and I get my sugar in my wine also, and I get more alcohol also. Okay, so some sweeter fortified wines are made like that as well. A few examples of fortified wines would be port. You've ever heard of port wine, sherry, Madeira. These are masala. These are examples of fortified wines. Then I say, okay, I have a wine. It's fortified. What if I want more aromas in it? Okay. my wine does not smell like orange peels, but I want it to smell like orange peels. So how do I get that aroma? So I add orange peels to it and I let it steep in the orange peels for a while. So that is called aromatized wine. Okay, these are the different types of wines. The aromatized wine you're going to see probably in your bar if you uh, go to your bar and you see this brand called Martini, not Martini the cocktail, but Martini the vermouth. So that is also an example of fortified wine, right? Made from grapes. That is about the types in terms of how it is made. Now, wine, like I said, a still wine or a sparkling wine, the maximum it can have is 15.5% of alcohol. Okay? But this is a 750 ml bottle. So only 15% of the 750 ml bottle is alcohol. So there has to be something else that's filling up that space, right? Can't be all alcohol. So what is there in your wine? I'll just take you back a little. So there's alcohol, of course. Then if you taste wine and in ideal conditions, I would have brought the wine along and you'd been tasting with me. But when you taste wine, you see that it's a little bit sweet, it's a little bit sour, sometimes it's a little bit bitter. Where do all these tastes come from? There has to be something in this wine that is giving us a sour taste or a sweet taste or a bitter taste, right? So the sourness comes from acids. So wine naturally has acids. There are different kinds of acids. How do you taste acids? Of course, sourness is the perception on our tongue. But when you drink something which is very acidic, like a fresh lime with a lot of lime, your mouth starts to water. The more your mouth waters, more the acid in the wine. So that is how you perceive when you sip your wine, your mouth starts to water a lot. That is the acidity in the wine. Where does the sweetness come from? Of course, it has to come from sugars. So there are sugars in the wine. It can be less than 1 gram in 1 liter and go up to 120, 150 grams in a liter of wine. So that will give you different categories of wine, and I will explain that next. There's alcohol, there's acids, there's sugar. Sometimes you taste that slight bitterness in the wines. Sometimes the wines make your mouth dry. Where does that come from? That comes from something called tannins. Tannins can be present in white wines as well, but they are definitely present in red wines. Tannins are the same things which are present in jamun, right? When you eat a jamun, your mouth becomes dry, your teeth become dry, and it gives color. So those are tannins, right? And there are other compounds, of course. So based on the amount of sugar it has, it can be a dry wine, very little sugar, off dry, a little more sugar, medium sweet, a little more sugar, and a lot of sugar would be a sweet wine. Okay, so that's how you express yourself in terms of the sweetness of wine. Again, when there is alcohol and there is sugar, of course, that's going to increase or decrease the thickness of wine, and that is called the body of wine. So it can be light bodied, medium bodied, or full bodied wine. Yeah, these are the different ways in which you express to in which a customer would express to you, I want a still wine which should be dry and light bodied. So they will actually kind of tell you a lot about the wine that they want to order. All of these things will be helpful in understanding what the customer really wants. Also, I think we're running out of time, so if you have any questions, I think you should just ask me before I go forward. Does anyone have any questions? Do we have any questions?
No.
No, ma'am.
Yes, now everybody is unmute. They can ask the
No, ma'am.
questions.
No questions? You understood everything? I'm such a good teacher. I should get a job at your college. Okay. Last thing I really wanted to discuss this is
Miss
you
Heena,
all. Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you.
no
We
problem.
maybe we can resume if we time out 40 minutes are out then.
Yeah, I think it's showing me on the timer that I have 6 minutes.
Yes.
So I think it's all right. If people still have questions, we will resume.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So about the label of wine, I've put two pictures on your screen. One is from France, the other is from Argentina. All New World and Old World. So once you start working, you will hear a lot about New World wines and Old World wines. What is New World and what is Old World? So I think the name explains itself. People who've been making wine for a really, really long time, and where sort of the origins of wine happen. Those countries come in New World, primarily Europe. So that would be France, Italy, Portugal, Germany, Spain. These countries come in Old World wines. How are they different from New World? They've been growing grapes for a really long time. They've been making wine for a really, really long time, thousands of years. So, because they've been doing this for such a long time, they have laws governing everything. From everything, when I say everything, from the amount of water that you're allowed to put in your grapes, to the label regulations, to the process in which the wine is made, to the amount of certain grapes which can be added. So everything is regulated by laws. That's the primary difference between Old World and New World. Right? New World is slightly more experimental. People are going a little bit freestyle. So when Chandon, when Moet actually wanted to make a new world style wine, they didn't really take Moet to the new world. They established a new brand called Chandon, and they went to Australia and established their winery because they knew they could experiment in the new world. But they couldn't experiment in France because there's so many regulations that they can only put X amount of grapes and X kind of grapes in that wine. So that is why people, prefer the new world when they want to launch new style, new age wines. The other difference is in the label. So if you see on the left hand side in the green bottle, it says Chablis. And even if you've studied your WSETs, okay, wrong. Even if you studied your degree or your diploma, and you will work really hard to think about what is this grape Chablis, where did I study it? I can't remember it. You can't, because it's the name of the region. These guys don't put the name of the grape on the label because they've been growing it for so long. So, for example, if you had a plot where your college is, and today you decided, I'm going to plant Chardonnay in this plot, and you kept planting Chardonnay for 50 years, for 100 years, for 150 years. Now, people, when they come to that plot, you don't even need to tell them it's Chardonnay. You just write the name of the plot and they say, okay, this plot only produces Chardonnay. And real-time example would be Burgundy. So if you go to Burgundy, you know it's going to be a Chardonnay if it's white. You know it's going to be a Pinot Noir if it's red. Yeah. So that's how the old world functions in terms of the labels. They put the name of the region and they're called regional wines, not the grape variety. Whereas if you see on the other side, the black bottle, it says Trapiche Oak Cask Malbec. It's literally everything is explained in those three phrases. So Trapiche is the name of the producer. Oak Cask, it's been aged in oak, and Malbec is the name of the grape. So when you read that, it's very easy to understand. Okay, Malbec, this wine must taste like this. I can pair it with such and such food. It's easier to understand new world wines. In the old world, there's no solution but to start learning the regions. How I did was I picked up one region per week and I would just study literally everything about that region. And it's not that hard if you go region by region, because if you start studying Burgundy, if you start studying just Chablis, Chablis only produces wines from Chardonnay, only white wines. It's a small village above Burgundy. So if I take Chablis for 1 week, I can actually study all the sub-regions, all the plots, all the producers. So you can actually, probably if you're really interested, you can do that. Otherwise, Google is always helpful, if a sudden question pops up to you. That's the primary difference. The other thing is corks. A lot of people think that screw caps are something which are used in New World, and Old World just uses corks, and corks are in some way premium wines and screw caps are not. So corks are essentially, corks or screw caps, they're essentially just to stop the wine from spilling out. Okay, they're just essentially stoppers. So first, let's establish that. Second, it will depend on the economics of the company, on the choice of the winemaker, on the choice how far is their wine going to travel. Is it going to be traveled? Is it going to travel in insulated vans, or is it going to be exposed to heat? Right, all of those things come in. When it's a screw cap, it's easy to open, especially in a country like India, where a lot of people at their homes, they don't have cork openers. So for them, it's really easy to buy a wine with a screw cap and just open it and enjoy it. Whereas with corks, you need a cork opener. It's a slight bit of a ritual. And you can't store the bottles upright. You have to store them like this.
Miss
Yeah.
Miss Hina, sorry to interrupt you. We are about to
Yeah.
now about to complete 40 minutes, so we will be disconnecting within a minute now. So shall
Okay.
we resume then? Reconnect?
Yeah, I think I've covered most of the topics. In case people have questions, then we can resume. Or if you want me to cover something else.
Yeah, they may be having few questions. We are literally out of
Okay, so
time
let's
now.
resume.
Okay.
Let's,
Right.
yeah.
So we will resume after 5 minutes because the session will be in the process of being recorded. Once the recording is
Okay.
done, then we will resume after 5 minutes.
So do I join on the same link?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. See you
All right.
again.
Thank you. See you, ma'am.
Bye.